content creation is compounds over time. The consistency compounds over time, just like interest in a bank account compounds over time. So the longer you wait, this is my addition to that. So the longer you wait, the longer it's going to take for that consistency to compound for you and benefit you. So just get started. Like that is my big mantra, is just start where you are, but get started.
Yeah.
Step into the world of success with your brand amplified, the ultimate podcast designed to unravel the intricacies of thriving businesses. I'm your host, Annika Jackson, and I'm on a mission to uncover the stories, strategies, and secrets that have propelled entrepreneurs and business leaders to success.
I have had the privilege of knowing Traci DeForge through the world of podcasting and through the Podcast Professionals Association, of which I'm a proud member. Traci, you have such a great wealth of experience in broadcast journalism, in the podcasting world, even still co-hosting a radio show, having your own podcast, helping hundreds of other people start their podcasts and realize how to use them as effective business tools, and also working on the Rolling Stone Council as a podcast lead, if you will. So thank you for being here. I am so appreciative of your time because I know you're always jumping from one thing to the next.
Oh, I am, but this is one of my most favorite things to do and my most favorite things to talk about. So it's really actually very fun for me. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to do what I love.
Of course. Well, let's start from the beginning. Did you always know you wanted to go into broadcast? You have the personality, you have the voice, you're engaging, you draw people in. So I could see how it could be natural, but is that where you thought you were going to end up?
So I love that question because radio is such an integral part of my DNA. And I loved radio ever since I was a very small, like little teeny tot child. I used to sleep with an AM transmitter radio under my pillow listening to ghost stories. So that was kind of like news talk and podcasting before anyone knew what a podcast was, believe me. But so my dad also, he was the president of the March of Dimes in our local community. And so when they would host walkathons, there would always be live radio remotes at the walkathons. And I was fascinated by their air talents now. They were disc jockeys then. So I have just absolutely always had an obsessive love for broadcast radio. And then ironically, entrepreneurship. So my mom will tell you if she was here that as early as the age of 7, I was creating my own businesses and having my friends work with me. My dad had his while you were out notepads, and I would get all of the materials from his office, and then I would build my own businesses and have my friends work with me. So I do think like I am one of those people that have just always loved doing what I do as an adult, even since I was a really small child. So
that's, I think, a very rare quality, but one I really love seeing in people. I see that in my own daughter and what her love is and what she wants to do. She's still in high school. But to have that passion from an early age and just keep driving towards it and not to get to a point where you're like, this isn't it anymore, right? Where you're run down. You just keep ideating and iterating and creating new businesses and new opportunities for everyone. But a lot of the opportunities have been for women as well.
Absolutely. So that's another thing that I think is such a part of my story that I love to share is that I've worked with thousands of women entrepreneurs in the startup phase, starting and helping them grow their businesses. And that really came out of, not only did starting Produce Your Podcast come out of a need for my own self, but also working with other women entrepreneurs. When I was at the top of my career in broadcast radio, I was managing 12 stations in the Atlanta market, 3 different geographies, hundreds of employees, all the things. I actually had one of those pivotal moments where I decided that was probably about as high up as I could go in the industry without owning my own station, which wasn't an opportunity at that time, especially. And so I started my own business development strategy and communication consulting company. And I looked around and there weren't a lot of resources for women entrepreneurs outside of the Chamber of Commerce. And those are great tools and resources, don't get me wrong, but I was looking for a little bit more of a Sex in the City kind of women entrepreneurship kind of connection. And so that led me to working with the founder of an organization at the time called Ladies Who Launch. And we built and grew this online and in-person network for women entrepreneurs, which was such a great catalyst for me to then ultimately work and do business development for Fortune 500s, which then led me to wanting to start my own podcast. And a lot of it had to do with the journey of entrepreneurship and the intersection between personal and business growth. My very first podcast is called Journey to There. But when I looked around to create my own podcast, this is in 2016, there weren't any full service agencies out there at that time specifically who really could do all the things. And that's what I was looking for myself, because I was very busy with my consulting business and I really didn't want to take the foot off the gas on that. But because of my broadcast radio experience, I also wanted a broadcast quality show. And that's how Produce Your Podcast was actually born. So this idea of working with women entrepreneurs has just been another thread of, even though I said I had my friends work with me when I was 7, but building teams and leadership and helping women grow and scale businesses is just something that has never left me as I've parallel tracked my broadcast radio career as well. And to your point, the starting of the Podcast Professionals Association, although it's co-ed for sure, it came out of the need for an organization for podcast service professionals like ourselves to really be able to connect with other people in our industry. We're working in silos all of the time. And it's just really wonderful to have a forum and a place to connect and really talk about how to adjust your prices, or what's your tech stack, or how are you handling, your growing and scaling and adding members to your team. And those are the conversations that, as you know, that we get to have with that. So I literally have built my world around the businesses that I love.
Well, and I hear some common threads: connection, collaboration, uplifting, right? Mentorship, providing value. So you're definitely a servant leader. And I feel like a lot of people who come onto my podcast have that quality, which I love, because then it just makes it such a more fun conversation. So I'm like, yes, my people. And that's how I felt about you as soon as we met, when we were meeting online. And then at Podcast Movement Evolutions.
Yes.
So you talked a little bit about Podcast Professionals Association and some of those goals. And that came out of the need you saw after having, Produce Your Podcast and going, hey, there's something else missing here. So let's go back to Produce Your Podcast. What was the start of that? Was it difficult to make that transition or was it pretty easy because you already had this extensive broadcast background and getting your first other podcaster in the system?
Yeah, so I love that question. No one's ever asked it to me in that way. And it's such a fun question to answer. So outside of the fact that I saw the need in the marketplace, and I think starting Produce Your Podcast, it didn't make it easier that I had such a strong, basically double decades of experience in broadcast radio at the time. It didn't make me easier to start Produce Your Podcast, because launching, producing, scaling, growing a podcast is completely different than broadcast radio as itself as an entity. But what it did provide for me was vision. Because I had worked in radio for so long, I was able to really, almost in a crystal ball perspective, especially you have to kind of go back in time. So this is roughly right at 10 years ago. So that's when businesses were just exploring podcasting. Accessibility to podcasting had just become so much easier because the podcast app was now on the iPhone, and the accessibility was easier. Using it as a branding and a marketing tool was something that people were just starting to talk about. And so for me, I just had all of this level of expertise in terms of monetization, how to build shows for scale, and all of the things that worked very pragmatically in broadcast radio, formatting shows and advertising, sponsorship, collaborative partnerships, all of those things, strategic partnerships. We have been doing that so successfully in broadcast radio that transitioning that knowledge over into podcasting was really easy for me. Ironically, though, very frustrating, though, because at that point in time, that vision was not mainstream in any way. So I found myself, again, as a female entrepreneur with so much experience in the space, but actually knocking on doors with people still dealing with some of the, gender role challenges. And really, I would try to be having conversations with other broadcast radio owners about the benefits of podcasting and how they could bring it into their business model and use it very effectively. And I was getting shut down all over the place because they didn't really take it seriously then. So for me, it was incredibly frustrating because I felt I was standing on a soapbox, jumping up and down going, but you can't see it, but this is the future. This is the future. So now fast forward 10 years later, it's like every radio station, not only do they have a podcast for their independent shows, I mean, and again, like to really see how the industry has grown so much, not to be disparaging about what didn't happen then, but to really look at what's happened now. So at that point in time, ESPN didn't have podcasts. iHeart wasn't doing podcasting. Like it was really frustrating because I was having conversations with these big broadcast companies going, this is how we can innovate in this space. And I had a literal conversation with one of the operations managers of one of the, not the largest broadcast company, but definitely one of the medium size, had probably at least 110 stations in their footprint across the states. And their decision maker at that time said to me, I just don't see this happening. Like podcasters are just sitting in their underwear in their closets, drinking beer, recording episodes. And I just remember walking away from that conversation being so disappointed. And then now this particular individual has his own podcast consulting company in the space.
Of course.
Doesn't even work in the industry anymore. And at some point one day, I just want to be like, hello, remember me?
Oh my
So
God.
that is a very long-winded answer to your question, but it was more philosophically challenging for me than it was pragmatically. Now, scaling, I think one of the questions that you asked me was, how do we get our first client? And I love this story because my network in women entrepreneurship and working with all of those women that I'd helped launch and scale their businesses were absolute perfect people to have conversations with about adding podcasting into their marketing strategy. So it was such great synergy. So one of our very first clients, who their podcast is still today, 5-6 years going strong, Inside Design, were a group of interior decorators based out of the Atlanta market, my home market. And they actually, when they launched their interior design business, I worked with them to help them build, grow, and launch their interior design business. And then fast forward, when I was working in podcasting, I reached out to them and then I helped them launch their podcast as a business development tool for their entire interior design business. And it blew up. I mean, they had Marlo Thomas on their 100th episode representing Williams and Sonoma. They've spoken on global stages about podcasting benefiting their business. They've added additional episodes. I mean, really advertised in sponsorships. They've pulled in vendors that they worked with for years and monetized their show that way. And it has just been so full circle for me to really be able to have that experience through Producer Podcast and working with business owners. So it has been really an extremely inspiring and complicated journey, but one I wouldn't trade for anything.
It's so funny as you're talking about that. I'm like, yeah, everybody has podcasts now. Every sports team. I'm lucky enough that a little bit about my story of just I didn't know that this was a business. I just thought I had a hobby and it was growing, and then was like, wait a minute. And I am on an ad network and it's mostly sports. So every sports team has multiple podcasts, probably. The network that I'm on has a deal with Cumulus. And so I don't get a lot, but I get a little check, right, from Cumulus Radio. And I'm like, oh, this is really cool because I get to learn kind of from this side of things, not having grown up, if you will, in the industry and understanding it from that business perspective, but going from like, this actually is a business and I should take it seriously.
Absolutely. Yes.
So at what point do you think a business owner should look into starting a podcast? When they're starting their business, once they have their, feet on the ground a little bit, they have a little bit of business built up?
Yeah, so I think it's individual for each business owner. And the reason I say that is because when you are thinking through starting a podcast as a business tool, because that's what the 99.9% of our clients are, business owners or companies who are leveraging their podcasts as revenue growth opportunities, right? So what does that look like? Well, that looks like if you want to grow your visibility as a thought leader, subject matter expertise, these are words you hear a lot. If you want to get on more stages, if you want to be a TEDx speaker, if you want to publish a book. So all of those, so that's sort of like really defining like what is your why. And then the second part of that, it doesn't need to be mutually exclusive, but looking at it as a business development tool. So for the visibility piece we talked about, but generating leads and ultimately generating actual sales, either by marketing your own products and services inside your podcast or going outside to vendors that you've maybe worked with for years and they want to be aligned with the audience that you're connecting with. So there's no wrong time to start a podcast, and it's never too early or it's never too late. I think the most important piece of what you want to think through is, how is this podcast going to serve me and serve my business in a way that is efficient and integrates into my already existing business model? And then how is it going to help me to grow my revenues as a result of investing in the podcast? And when I say investing, I don't necessarily mean just the hard cost of actually having a show produced or producing a show on your own. I also mean the investment of time, bandwidth, and resources, because that's what you really want to take into consideration. However, one of the most important benefits is, whether you're just starting your own business and your podcast simultaneously, or you already have a well-run business and kind of layering it in as a business development tool, is how efficient podcasting can actually be. Because we were having a conversation before we even jumped on the recording about creating content and how important it is to be able to create content in all different ways. And in my opinion, and very well-educated opinion, creating a podcast and recording a podcast is the most cost-efficient way to generate content, because we're having this amazing conversation where, we're having fun doing it, which is so important. But once this podcast is recorded, the possibilities are endless in terms of vertical reels, horizontal videos, audio promos, blog posts, articles, visibility around show notes, content creation for social media. I mean, we only have to spend this 1 hour of time with each other and have a really amazing, fun time, learn from each other. But, oh, by the way, create multiple pieces of content as a result. So it's like, there's really no other platform that can do that for you right now.
Yeah. Preaching to the choir. I love it. But I love it when other people who are, really experts in the field share that, because then people who are listening will really understand. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
You talked about how 99.9% of the businesses that you work with on podcasting are really doing it to nurture leads, to grow their businesses and grow their revenue. I sometimes have people come to me who think, oh, well, you're making money doing this, so it must be easy. So I'm going to have a podcast, and that's going to be my product or brand, and I'm going to monetize right away. And then they come to me and I'm like, no. It takes a while. You have to show consistency, and you have to do this, and you have to do this. And before, perhaps maybe you're lucky and you'll get a sponsor right away, but it does take time to build up. So what do you say to people who are looking at as strictly like the podcast is going to be their business, or that's at least their mindset going into this field?
Well, we're challenged by a lot of content creators / influencers. With any business, you're always going to hear the story. I know, like, several years ago, the big story was the big exits, right? Like, oh, this person started this business and they sold it for $300 million. And this person started this business and they sold it for X amount. Or even in the podcast arena right now, it's the $100 million deal seems to be sort of almost like the status symbol. Travis Kelce, $100 million deal, Call Your Daddy, $160 million deal, Joe Rogan, double $1 million, then $2 million deal. So we are faced with that as independent creators all of the time, as that being the status quo. But that is so far from the status quo, because there's an analogy I really like to use, and it's about bamboo, which is kind of an interesting metaphor. But bamboo, for people who don't know this, it grows underground for 5 years and you never see it. You never see it. You don't even know it's happening. It grows vertically down for 5 years. And then once that seedling of bamboo pops up, it grows exponentially, like so tall and like wild, like a weed practically. And so when you see bamboo, you're thinking, man, that bamboo grows so fast, and you're thinking that has to be the coolest thing, but you're never really knowing the 5 years that went into what was happening before that. So with any business, whether it's your podcast or anything, you have to think about there are no true overnight success stories. There are some people who hit strides faster than others. There's some people who have a network larger than others. There's some people who have relationships, family or otherwise, that can help them grow exponentially faster than others. But showing up and doing the work consistently is truly the only way to grow either a business and or a podcast. So I just think we have to reframe expectations no matter what. And then think about, okay, drilling down into your point about monetization and podcasting, those variables are about as universally different as the story that I just told about different pockets of success, because there are podcasters that might be limited to a specific geography and a specific niche. Maybe, for example, it's a law firm who is only licensed to a certain state and only works within this certain genre of law, that is able to monetize their podcast with audience size of 500 people or less, because they have such a specific audience. And those people that are showing up for that content every single week or every single month are highly engaged and very ripe for access to someone who may want to integrate into that. So that is not something that's an overnight success story. That's something that you're an attorney, you have a podcast, you're putting really great information out there. For example, Nonprofit Counsel is a show that we produce. She is monetizing through a book. She's monetizing through online courses and programs. She has an entire law firm. A for-purpose law group is her firm. Nonprofit Counsel is her podcast. But it doesn't take a huge audience to be able to convert those people into clients, either through the online courses or buying the book, and maybe even ultimately becoming a client of her firm. So you have to define monetization. What does that mean to you? And then B, what does that look like if in your core inner network? Because that's always where you should start when you're thinking about monetization. We have a program in Producer Podcast called the Sponsorship Circle, where we literally coach people through podcast audiences of all sizes and how to connect with a brand or an advertiser that can benefit from being aligned with you and your audience. And you just start out with the idea of this three-legged stool. It's like the brand, the audience, and the host builds the foundation for this stool, because if any of those legs are wonky, you're not going to be able to build up from there. No bamboo is going to be happening off a wonky stool, right? So there's so many different ways, but I think what really ultimately ends up happening is people get disappointed and buy into the myth of the cost per thousand model, which is similar to what you were talking about, which does happen, and you can generate some revenues off of a cost per thousand model, which is, if for those people who aren't familiar with that, that's like for every 1,000 listeners, the industry standard is somewhere between $23 and $25, but it's got to take a lot of $23 to $25 to be able to really consider that an income. Right. Whereas if you look at non-traditional ways to monetize, like some of the examples I just gave, then you can be off to the races a little faster, but it's all contingent upon how you build your show, the format, how consistently you release it, touch points around your show in terms of how else you market your show outside of the podcast itself, and really tapping into that inner network of relationships that you've already built that know, like, and trust you as a brand already, and know your content that's going to attract the kind of people that they want to be associated with.
Yeah, those are all such great points. And I appreciate the way that you describe the different monetization methods. And in reality, you don't have to be on a certain list or have a certain number of downloads and followers and subscribers to achieve your goals, depending on what those goals might be. When somebody comes to you and is thinking about starting a podcast, do you walk them through a process to make sure that they're ready, that they'll take it seriously? What are those first steps?
Yes. So we, at Producer Podcast, when we bring someone into our portfolio of services, they usually enter us in one or two ways. One is what you're talking about, where they have the spark of an idea, or they have other business colleagues that have podcasts that have treated or worked well successfully for them, or they've guested on another podcast and they really all of a sudden sort of got the bug and realized, yeah, I'd like to have my own podcast myself. So when that pathway comes through, and the other pathway is someone who already has an existing show and they just want to up-level their show or monetize it or grow their audience more. But in terms of someone coming through with the spark of an idea, what we do before we pull the first music bed for them to listen to before we write the first show description, before we even talk about the format of their show, which is people often think that the format is the first thing you're going to talk about. But at Produce Your Podcast, what we talk about is really the ideation process around how is this podcast going to serve you as a business development tool. Like first and foremost, that's how we approach the podcast, because if it's not going to provide a return on investment in some capacity for you, and you're not having fun doing it, pretty much in that order, but only like they could swap back and forth in terms of priority, you're not going to keep doing, right? So all of the things can be solved in terms of what mic to use and what hosting platform to be on. And all of those things are pretty well accessible information these days, especially, but really building that foundational strategy about how you as a host are going to show up for your audience. What does the format look like to optimize your growth and to be optimized, quite honestly, for sponsorship? Because you want to think about that out of the gate, even if you're not going to activate it right away. And most importantly, we talk about how is this podcast going to fit into your business and your lifestyle. And that is such an important part I don't think enough people talk about. So we will literally be having conversations with business owners that are like, how much time do you have to devote to this podcast? Do you have a team to support you, or do you need to access an external team? And if you want to release every week, every other week, or once a month, we need to formulate a strategy for you for both production and marketing that is sustainable for you over time. Because if it's not, then you're not going to be happy with the output or the outcome, and you're going to pod fade, which is a real term, and your audience is going to have been so excited and be alongside you for the ride, and then all of a sudden you're going to ghost them, and that's not the outcome anybody wants. So we spend a lot of time on the front end talking through strategy, not just the format, but also all of those other areas, so that it is a sustainable investment over time.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, because that's something that is really important. People will start and maybe they will have pod fade, like you said, or something else will come up in their lives and they won't have the time commitment anymore. And that's one thing when people ask me about, okay, podcasting, should I do it? Should I not? I also say, how much time do you have? Can you pre-record a few episodes so that you know that you have some batched, so that if something happens one day that you're supposed to record, you already have some content so that you can have that consistency and show up for that audience who really wants to hear from you.
Yes, definitely. And those are all things to take into consideration. And there's so many opportunities to collaborate or utilize other people to support you now than there ever have been before. I mean, one of the things that we did as Produce Your Podcast as a company, we had built systems around full service support, and we take full service support very seriously. Like, if you're in our full service portfolio, like literally all you have to do is show up and record, and we even have a client manager that schedules that with you, schedules your guests for you. Like we built it with the systems that I would want as a business owner to basically insulate myself to be able to sustain a podcast while running my business. So everything that we've done and how we've developed our full services are based on really busy executives like you and me and people who are running businesses so that it can be sustainable. But we realized we had developed all of these systems, and that's why I created the Podcast Management Academy, because I really wanted people to be able to really learn the behind the scenes elements of crossing the T's and dotting the I's, and all of the elements that are so important in being able to support a podcaster, because you may not have necessarily the budget or the interest in having a full service production company like Produce Your Podcast, but you're still, no matter if you're a solo entrepreneur, if you're running a small business, you're still going to need some support. You cannot do all things to be all things to all people all the time. And I've worked with enough entrepreneurs over the years to know that's one of the hardest elements about running a business is chicken and egg. I don't have the money to delegate, so I have to do it all myself. But if I do it all myself, I'm never going to make enough money to delegate. And it's like you just get caught in this spiral. So you really want to think through, like, how can you be supported? And that's one of the reasons why we took all of our systems that we created and put them into the certification program so that we could, again, my whole mission is a really sustainable ecosystem of podcast service professionals serving podcasters, because if they keep putting good content out into the world, they change the world with their voice, and they could change conversations that are happening. And that is what I feel is my mission, is to be a conduit to those pieces and parts so that that keeps happening.
Well, I love everything about this, and I'm such a big fan of yours. I know, I know that you have the full service, and you mentioned that there are other ways people can work with you as well. So maybe they come, they get a little bit of consulting, and then they say, okay, this is what my budget is or my time limitation. Then you can advise them on what they may want to do themselves or have an outside team versus what your team would handle based on that.
Yeah. So I really appreciate you bringing that up, because I think a lot of times when Produce Your Podcast gratefully has built an incredible reputation in the industry over the last decade. But with that also comes a perception of, oh, they're a full service agency, and they're, this and that. And we are this and that in a really good way in terms of quality and really high touch customer service, and really focus on quality. But my mission from the time that I launched Produce Your Podcast and all the way up until now, which hasn't changed, is being able to have quality services that are typically not attainable if you are a small to medium-sized business, because they're usually reserved for the larger branded podcasts that we all know and love, like the Trader Joe's and the Charles Schwab's and the bigger shows like that. But a small to medium-sized business can leverage and benefit from a podcast almost more so than a big branded podcast, but they still need access to the resources and the tools and all of the things that make it that successful for them. So we have always been, the cornerstone of our business has always been built on being affordable and attainable to the business owners who need these services. And we do that through things like, a really good example I can relate to is we had a podcaster invest with us in the discovery and launch process and get them all up and running. And she is just a phenomenal host. She's a breast cancer survivor. She has a mission to help women in their hormones. Her podcast is called The Hairy Chin. And so we worked with her all the way up through discovery and launch, but she wanted to ultimately have a different opportunity for her ongoing sustainable production model. But what she chose to do with us, which I think is so smart, is just to do power hour consulting sessions once a quarter for an entire year. And so that was a very affordable way for her to continue to stay connected to really good expert insights and information to help grow her show, but also very cost effective because it's a 1 hour power hour per quarter. And she budgeted it for the next 12 months. And so it's like she was so smart and strategic by putting the money in the front end and getting everything up and launched with the really great systems and knowing that everything was launched the right way for discoverability, for all of the things we talked about. But now she just wants to sustain that energy by staying connected to us through strategy. And I love that model, right? And it's super affordable. So those are the things I'm talking about in terms of like, you don't have to go full in all the time with full service everything. There are other, like we do sponsorship coaching I mentioned. We do growth acceleration, audience growth, strategy consulting, like basically just what can we do to support you to grow your show? We want to be there for you for that.
I wanted to ask about a couple of things. I know one thing that you also help people do is hone in their message for their call to action. So whether it's the small law firm, yes, they want clients, but they also have a course, they have books, they have other opportunities to interact with them. And I think that's a place that people often leave out and forget about, myself included, right? And so what do you see, or what advice would you have to somebody on how to position their call to action to make it effective and something people will actually take action on?
Yes. Thank you for asking this question, because everyone needs to know the answer to this. There are a couple things that and think about this through any piece of content that you're putting out there. This does not have to be related to just a podcast. But when you are considering a call to action, essentially is translating into inviting someone to do business with you. If you can think about a call to action, a lot of times people think about call to action and it freaks them out, or that I can't do that. That's too salesy. That's not my style. Okay, so if you own a business, you're a salesperson. And if you have an issue with that, then you should probably not be a business owner. So let's just start there. Sales is, no matter how you classify it, you're going to have to sell yourself and sell your products in order to be able to generate revenues in order to stay in business. A call to action doesn't have to be intimidating or threatening. It just needs to be an invitation to continue the conversation. So when we are talking specifically in podcast terms, I use the term warm invite call to action as a teaching mechanism because I want people to hear the difference. So literally, I will show you the difference. So in this situation, you might say, okay, Traci, how can people get in touch with you? Which you probably would ask me. We're going to go ahead and skip that and do. And so normally some people might say, oh, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. Go to my website. If you want to book a call with me, like all these kind of things that are just like, first of all, I just gave you like 5 different opportunities and they were all very generic. Or even worse, you use one call to action, but it's like, sign up for my newsletter. Okay, well, thank you. But really, what are you going to do for me to give up my email address to you, right? So most people think of a call to action as something that they either don't give a lot of consideration to. And that's like, yeah, sign up for my newsletter. Or they give 5 different choices and you got to think about yourself being in a food court and you're like looking around and there's so many different choices. You're like, I don't want anything to eat. I can't even make a decision, right? So when you are doing a call to action, you just want to pick one action. So in our case, it would be, I would really love it if you want to learn more about any of the things that I've been saying or talking about today for you to go to produceyourpodcast.com. And then I'll tell you why, because there are resources, there are blogs, there's opportunities to connect there. You can sample some of our work. You can see how people have integrated their sponsorships. If you sample some of the shows, like all of these things live on produceyourpodcast.com. If you do something that's just like, I want you thinking about like talking to one person, one human, one connection, and you invite them, then that's so personal. And it also provides, and then make sure you're saying like the value, like what's in it for that person to continue the conversation with you. And if like when I met you in person in Los Angeles at Evolutions, if I just walked up to you and said, sign up for my newsletter. Like, what? Who are you? Right? We have to think about our call to action the exact same way. It's like invite someone to be a part of your world. Don't just like push it on them and not show them any value for why. Yeah. This is a big passion point for me, you can tell.
Yeah, it's funny because I do notice if somebody says, oh, this and this and that, I'm like, no, let's give one easy place for people to go to.
It's hard. It's hard to pick just one. When you're all over the place too, that's another thing I really invite people to consider. Again, whether it's your podcasting content or just in general, you've got to live where your audience is because that's where you're going to have the highest engagement. Everyone says you got to be on TikTok, you got to be on X, you got to be on Instagram, you got to be on LinkedIn. Well, you can't be all things to all people. So you've got to choose the platform primarily first and foremost, especially if you're a small business owner and you don't have somebody who's managing all your content, posting all your content, engaging with all your content. Like really hone in on where does your audience live and engage the most frequently and start there and then grow out from there. Yeah. Because it's all about quality versus quantity in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. I know you've worked with so many thousands, right, of people to help them with their business results. But is there one story that comes to mind or one or two stories that just give you the warm fuzzies every time you think about this client and the success that they had?
Oh, wow. I mean, well, I love the story that I shared, about starting with someone, helping them from like working with them, starting to grow their business, then being able to layer in their podcasting in a second strategy. That was always fun. We have had so many beautiful relationships with Produce Your Podcast. Our average client spends at least 3.5 years with us. So we really get to know them and we build relationships with them. We've seen people, we've had 2 TEDx speakers come straight from basically building their podcast and then not only 1, but 2 TEDx talks. I love seeing those happen. I think what I personally love the most is when I work through the discovery process and we were really able to take their vision and then have that show be an extension of their brand. And in a lot of ways, make a dream come true for them because they've either always wanted a radio show or they've always wanted to be able to have a podcast and be able to have it in a way. And that when I came up in radio, and even when I was in high school and college, being on the radio was like this aspirational, like, how are you ever going to be able to do that? How are you ever going to be able to be on the radio? And we're so fortunate now with the technology, how cost effective it is. We can change conversations with our voice and make impact. Like, we produce shows for bariatric patients that are, I mean, those are life-changing conversations. People who are benefiting from health and wellness and being able to understand nutrition better in a way that works for them. Like, that's what I love. Like, when I have a day that's not going so great for me, because I'm a very busy business owner. I have lots of days that don't go my way. Sometimes I go to the other side of this desk and I look back at this wall and I just think about the impact, like Fertility Cafe, Storked. Oh, I love Storked. They're all about redefining the modern family, and Fertility Cafe is all about surrogacy and third party and like helping people build families. Like, to be able to be a part of all of the impact and the ripple effects of people getting their voices out is the best gift I could ever be given. So I can't pick a favorite. It's like pick a favorite kid. I can't do that. But what I can say is that I love the process of being able to support people changing the world with their stories.
That's beautiful. You've had a full circle moment. Not only are you just such a busy businesswoman, consulting with people, running, Produce Your Podcast, Podcast Management Academy, Podcast Professionals Association, and you also have podcasts, and then you also are back on the radio on top of all of that.
That has been a ton of fun. It really has. I co-host a radio show that's based out of Los Angeles, and it's all about entrepreneurship. So I don't talk about, every now and then we will have some podcasting specific parts of the conversation, but it's really just to be back doing, back in love with my original first love. Like, it is a full circle moment. And we, of course, repurpose it as a podcast. So if you're not in Los Angeles, you can download it. But this is the other frustration for me as a podcaster and a podcast professional, is that the radio technology is not up to speed. So the audio quality of our podcast is so challenging for me. I'm like, can we get with the program? There's some opportunities out there that we could make this sound better. But so I still have my same decades of frustration full circle as well. So.
Oh, I know.
I love radio, but they have some growing up to do.
Well, hopefully you'll be able to be part of that as well.
They'd have to listen to me first. That's therein lies the challenge.
I could ask you questions and have more conversation and stories for hours, but I want to allow people to find out more from the website. I'll have that in the show notes, of course. Produce Your Podcast, and we'll get the links to everything else that Traci's doing. But Traci, do you have a favorite quote, mantra, verse, just some family motto, words that just get you through every single day?
I have so many, because I really love personal development. And as my first podcast, like I said, was all about the intersection between personal and business growth. So that's both of those areas I'm super passionate about. But I think when in the context of our conversation, and one of the things that I really like to put out there is just to start where you are, because I see so many people get paralyzed by fear. And even that can come in the form of procrastination, that can come in the form of perfectionism, especially if you're a female entrepreneur. We can saddle ourselves with so many barriers and bottlenecks to getting to that next level or that next step or that next decision because we have fear. And I would just say, if you could do anything today, what is the one action that you could take today that would move you one step forward? And it can be the smallest step. It can be the smallest step of just I listened to this podcast and now I'm going to go read a blog post about, just don't discount how the very small incremental steps that you take are what are ultimately going to get you to the success that you want over time. But if you don't start, you won't ever get there. And a business coach that I am very fond of says, content creation compounds over time. The consistency compounds over time, just like interest in a bank account compounds over time. So the longer you wait, this is my addition to that. So the longer you wait, the longer it's going to take for that consistency to compound for you and benefit you. So just get started. Like that is my big mantra, is just start where you are, but get started.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much for taking some time. I know you're going from meeting to meeting today. We all live in this world, so it's really nice to take a breath. That's what these conversations are for me. They're that time when I get to network, I get to learn something myself, and I come away really inspired all over again. So thank you for bringing that to the show.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, because honestly, this is going to be the highlight of my day today, because I have looked at my calendar and I'm super grateful that we had this opportunity to connect and collaborate. And thank you for being a member of the Podcast Professionals Association and for bringing all the light into the world that you do and helping and support podcasters. Like, just thank you.
And thank you to everybody who's watching or listening to this episode. I'm so grateful to be here with Traci. Give us a rating and review if you haven't yet. Those really help with searchability. And I will be back again with another amazing guest in a couple of days.
Thanks for listening or watching to this episode of Your Brand Amplified. Don't forget to leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast listening platform. And if you want to learn more, check us out at yourbrangamplified.com.